Mr. Crawford and I stand here tonight because this city belongs to everyone, not just the people in this ballroom. Change is coming.
The people you ignore are usually the ones who know the most. The sentence had not been spoken yet, but by the end of the night, it would echo through every corner of the luxury ballroom overlooking Manhattan. Rain traced silver lines across the towering glass walls while crystal chandeliers bathed the room in warm golden light. Hundreds of guests filled the five-star hotel ballroom, their conversations blending with soft piano music and the distant hum of New York traffic below. At the center of it all stood Ethan Crawford, one of the most powerful billionaires in the country, preparing to announce a business deal that investors had been anticipating for months. Cameras waited near the stage. Reporters stood along the edges of the room. Wealth and influence seemed to flow naturally toward Ethan wherever he walked. Maya Johnson moved quietly between tables carrying a silver tray loaded with sparkling water glasses. Her black waitress uniform blended into the background exactly the way service workers were expected to. Most guests barely noticed her existence. She preferred it that way. After a 10-hour shift, exhaustion rested heavily on her shoulders. Earlier that morning, she had spent hours helping her father through another medical appointment before rushing downtown to make it to work on time. Yet despite her fatigue, her eyes remained observant. Years of working around powerful people had taught her something valuable. People revealed more when they believed nobody important was listening. Ethan stepped away from a group of investors and took his place near the front of the ballroom. As Maya approached with a glass of water, he glanced at her briefly. His expression immediately shifted into annoyance. He rolled his eyes as though her presence alone interrupted something important. A few nearby executives noticed and smirked. Maya placed the glass carefully beside him. "Your water, sir," she said politely. Ethan barely looked at her. "You are just a waitress," he muttered under his breath, loud enough for several guests nearby to hear. A few quiet laughs followed. Maya remained still. She had heard variations of that sentence many times before. Sometimes it came wrapped in jokes. Sometimes it arrived as open disrespect. The words themselves rarely surprised her anymore. What surprised her was how often successful people underestimated everyone around them. Ethan reached for the glass and turned toward a group of investors waiting for his announcement. That should have been the end of the moment. Instead, Maya calmly looked at him and asked a simple question. "Does your Boston partner know you are announcing this tonight?" The reaction was immediate. Ethan froze. His hand stopped halfway to the glass. The color drained subtly from his face beneath the ballroom lights. Around him, conversations faltered. One investor slowly lowered his champagne glass. Another turned toward Ethan with sudden curiosity. Rain continued sliding down the giant windows while the piano player carried on as though nothing had happened. Maya held her tray quietly. She did not smile. She did not threaten him. She simply waited. Ethan stared at her now as if seeing her for the first time. Because nobody in this ballroom was supposed to know about the Boston deal. And somehow the waitress standing in front of him did. The silence that followed felt strangely louder than the piano music drifting through the ballroom. Ethan Crawford stared at Maya Johnson while rain traced silver paths down the towering glass walls behind them, and hundreds of wealthy guests tried to pretend they were not listening. The billionaire recovered quickly on the surface. Years of negotiating billion-dollar agreements had taught him how to hide panic behind a polished smile. But Maya noticed the slight tightening around his eyes. She noticed the way his fingers remained frozen around the water glass. Most importantly, she noticed that he no longer looked at her like she was invisible. One investor standing nearby finally cleared his throat. "Boston partner?" he asked with a nervous laugh. "That sounds interesting." A few others exchanged glances beneath the warm chandelier light. Ethan smiled smoothly and lifted the glass. "I think there has been a misunderstanding," he said. "I have meetings in many cities." The explanation sounded reasonable, yet nobody seemed completely convinced. Maya remained calm. She had no interest in embarrassing him publicly. In truth, she regretted speaking at all. But the disrespect in his voice moments earlier had awakened something she usually kept buried. Not anger, weariness. The exhaustion that comes from watching powerful people assume they're the only ones paying attention. Ethan took a careful sip of water before lowering his voice. "Walk with me for a moment." Maya hesitated. She still had tables waiting for service. But the ballroom manager nodded subtly from across the room. She followed Ethan toward a quieter section near the glass wall overlooking Manhattan. The city shimmered beneath the rain like scattered diamonds across black velvet. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Ethan turned toward her. "How do you know about Boston?" His voice remained controlled, but tension hid beneath every word. Maya rested the silver tray against her hip. "I was working a conference at the Harbor Grand Hotel 3 weeks ago." Ethan said nothing. Maya continued. "You were meeting with 3 executives in a private dining room." A pulse moved visibly in his jaw. "You overheard something." Maya shook her head. "I listened because your group spent 4 hours discussing a merger while acting as if the staff did not exist." The answer unsettled him even more. Around them, guests continued mingling beneath crystal chandeliers while reporters prepared near the stage for Ethan's announcement. Everything looked normal, yet the atmosphere felt different now. Fragile somehow. Ethan folded his arms. "And what exactly do you think you heard?" Maya looked toward the rain-covered skyline before answering. "Enough to know tonight's announcement is not the full story." The billionaire studied her carefully. He expected arrogance. He expected blackmail. Instead, he found neither. Maya appeared tired more than anything else. Tired from work. Tired from life. Tired from being underestimated. "If you know so much," Ethan said quietly, "why have you not told anyone?" Maya almost laughed. Not because the question was funny, but because it revealed everything about the world he lived in. Because most people are not interested in the truth, she replied softly. They are interested in leverage. Ethan looked away toward the city lights. The answer lingered between them. Behind them, applause suddenly erupted near the stage as organizers announced that the presentation would begin in 10 minutes. Investors started moving toward their seats. Reporters adjusted cameras. The evening was accelerating toward a moment that could affect billions of dollars. Maya shifted her tray and prepared to leave. Then Ethan asked one final question. "Who are you really?" For the first time, uncertainty entered his voice. Maya met his eyes calmly. "Just a waitress," she said. Then she turned and walked back into the ballroom while Ethan remained standing alone beside the rain-covered glass, watching her disappear into a crowd that suddenly seemed far less invisible than before. The applause near the stage gradually faded as guests settled into their seats beneath the crystal chandeliers. Reporters adjusted cameras. Investors checked phones. Waiters moved carefully between tables carrying silver trays beneath the warm golden light. From a distance, the ballroom appeared exactly as it should. Elegant, controlled, successful. Yet Maya Johnson could feel the tension running quietly beneath the surface of every conversation. She continued serving drinks while the city shimmered through rain-covered windows behind her. More than once she noticed guests glancing toward Ethan Crawford before quickly looking away. Wealthy people understood uncertainty the way sailors understood storms. They recognized the signs long before anyone spoke them aloud. Ethan remained near the stage speaking with advisors and investors. But something had changed in the way people approached him. Earlier that evening, he had controlled every conversation effortlessly. Now questions lingered longer. Smiles looked more cautious. Confidence no longer flowed naturally around him. Maya placed fresh glasses at a nearby table and tried to focus on work. She regretted becoming part of the evening's drama. Her goal every night was simple. Finish her shift. Help her father. Pay the bills. Survive another week. Attention complicated. Everything. A few minutes later, the ballroom manager approached her quietly. "Maya," he said, "the owner would like to speak with you." Her stomach tightened slightly. Hotel owners rarely requested conversations with waitstaff during major events. She followed him through a side corridor overlooking the Manhattan skyline. Rain rolled down the massive windows while city lights reflected across polished marble floors. At the far end of the corridor stood Marcus Reed, the hotel owner. His reputation stretched across New York hospitality circles. Unlike many wealthy executives, Marcus knew the names of nearly every employee working in his properties. He greeted Maya with a calm smile. "Busy night," he said. Maya laughed softly. "That is one way to describe it." Marcus studied her for a moment before speaking again. "Ethan is asking questions about you." Maya lowered her eyes briefly. "I figured he might." Marcus nodded. "He is not the only one." The sentence landed heavier than she expected. Marcus leaned against the window overlooking the rain-covered city. Do you know what most people in that ballroom see when they look at you? Maya smiled faintly. A waitress. Exactly. Marcus looked toward the ballroom doors. And that is why nobody ever asks the right questions. For several seconds, only Rain touched the glass between them. Then Marcus continued. I remember when Columbia University called about you. Maya closed her eyes briefly. She had not heard anyone mention that chapter of her life in years. You graduated at the top of your financial analysis program, Marcus said. 3 internship offers. Scholarship recommendations. Every professor expected you to have a remarkable career. Maya stared out at the city lights below. Life had other plans. Marcus did not argue. He already knew the story. Her mother's illness. The mounting bills. The family responsibilities that arrived faster than opportunities. Some dreams do not end dramatically. They simply get postponed one difficult day at a time. Back inside the ballroom, another round of applause erupted as organizers prepared Ethan's presentation. Marcus glanced toward the sound before looking back at Maya. You know something important, do not you? Maya remained silent. Marcus smiled gently. That was not really a question. She finally answered. I know enough to understand why he is nervous. Marcus nodded slowly. And yet you have told nobody. Maya looked through the rain-covered glass toward the distant lights of Brooklyn. Because ruining someone is easy, she said softly. Helping someone become better is harder. Marcus studied her carefully after that. Then he smiled in a way that carried genuine respect. The funny thing, he said, is that everyone in that ballroom thinks power belongs to the richest person in the room. Maya turned toward him. Marcus glanced through the doors where Ethan stood preparing for his announcement beneath the chandeliers. Tonight, he said quietly, I am not sure that is true anymore. The ballroom lights dimmed slightly as the presentation countdown appeared across the enormous screen behind the stage. Conversations softened. Reporters moved into position. Investors straightened their jackets and settled into their seats beneath the crystal chandeliers, while rain continued sliding down the towering glass walls surrounding the Manhattan skyline. Maya Johnson returned to work carrying a silver tray through the crowded ballroom, but her conversation with Marcus Reed lingered in her thoughts. The city beyond the windows looked distant and blurred beneath the storm, almost like another world entirely. Yet inside the ballroom, everything was moving toward a moment that could reshape fortunes before midnight. Ethan Crawford stood near the stage reviewing notes with 2 senior advisors. His expression looked composed again from a distance. Years of public appearances had taught him how to perform confidence even when uncertainty lived beneath the surface. But Maya noticed something others missed. He kept checking the ballroom. Not the investors. Not the reporters. Her. Every few minutes his eyes searched the room until he found her. Then he looked away again. The behavior continued long enough that even some investors began noticing. Maya placed fresh glasses at a nearby table and tried to ignore it. She wanted the evening to end. Nothing more. The giant screen behind the stage flashed promotional graphics, while applause gradually spread across the ballroom. Ethan was scheduled to begin speaking in less than 5 minutes. That was when one of his advisors approached him holding a phone. The man's expression changed visibly after reading a message on the screen. Ethan immediately took the phone and stepped aside. Even from across the room, Maya saw tension return to his face. Whatever he was reading mattered. A few investors noticed as well. The atmosphere tightened again. Rain tapped softly against the windows while distant thunder rolled above Manhattan. Ethan finished reading and lowered the phone slowly. His jaw tightened. One advisor whispered something urgently. Ethan responded with a brief nod before looking directly toward Maya once more. This time he did not look confused. He looked concerned. Moments later he crossed the ballroom. Guests instinctively moved aside as he approached. Maya stopped beside a marble column beneath the warm chandelier glow. We need to talk again, Ethan said quietly. I am working, Maya replied. Ethan glanced toward the stage where organizers were signaling for him to prepare. This cannot wait. Maya studied him for a second. The arrogance from earlier had almost disappeared now. In its place stood a man trying to understand a situation slipping beyond his control. What happened? She asked. Ethan lowered his voice. The Boston group just delayed their confirmation. Maya remained silent. Nobody knew there was uncertainty, he continued. Except you. Rain shimmered across the glass behind them. Maya understood immediately. The deal was weaker than investors believed. Ethan had planned to announce confidence, while hoping final approval followed later. A dangerous strategy. You were moving too fast, Maya said calmly. Ethan stared at her. How would you know that? She met his eyes. Because that is exactly what they argued about in Boston. The sentence landed heavily between them. Ethan looked away toward the stage lights. For the first time all evening, he seemed less like a billionaire and more like a man carrying the weight of a decision he wished he could undo. Around them, investors continued taking their seats. Cameras turned toward the stage. The countdown now showed 2 minutes remaining. Maya adjusted the tray against her shoulder. You still have time, she said quietly. Ethan looked back at her. Time for what? Maya glanced toward the enormous screen glowing above the stage. To tell the truth before someone else does. The words settled over him in complete silence. Nearby applause began building again as the event host walked toward the microphone. Ethan followed Maya's gaze toward the stage, then toward the rain-covered skyline beyond the glass, then back toward the crowd waiting to hear him speak. And for the first time that evening, he looked genuinely afraid of the choice waiting for him in front of everyone. The ballroom erupted into applause as the event host stepped onto the stage beneath the crystal chandeliers, completely unaware of the storm building beneath the polished surface of the evening. Investors straightened in their seats. Reporters aimed cameras toward the massive screen glowing behind the podium. Rain continued sliding down the towering glass walls overlooking Manhattan, while reflections of city lights shimmered across the marble floor. Maya Johnson returned to her duties carrying a silver tray through the crowded room, but her attention remained fixed on Ethan Crawford. He had not moved. He still stood near the marble column where their conversation ended, staring toward the stage as though calculating the cost of every possible decision. The countdown disappeared from the giant screen. It was time. An organizer approached Ethan and quietly signaled for him to begin. The billionaire nodded automatically. Years of experience carried him forward even while uncertainty weighed heavily behind his eyes. The ballroom welcomed him with enthusiastic applause as he climbed the short staircase toward the podium. Maya watched from the edge of the room beside a row of banquet tables covered in white linen. Everything about Ethan looked composed. His suit was flawless. His posture remained confident. His expression appeared calm. Yet she now understood the difference between confidence and certainty. Confidence could be performed. Certainty could not. Ethan reached the podium and placed both hands lightly against its polished surface. The room immediately fell silent. Hundreds of guests focused on him beneath the warm chandelier light. Cameras began recording. Investors leaned forward. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. Ethan glanced toward the prepared speech displayed on the confidence monitor beside the stage. Then something unexpected happened. He did not begin reading. Several seconds passed. The silence stretched longer than anyone expected. Maya noticed confused expressions appearing around the ballroom. Ethan slowly looked up from the monitor and scanned the room. His gaze briefly found Maya, standing near the back wall beneath the golden lighting. Then he looked toward the rain-covered windows overlooking Manhattan. Finally, he returned his attention to the audience. Good evening, he said. His voice sounded steady, but quieter than before. Tonight, I plan to announce a partnership that would reshape several markets. A ripple of anticipation moved through the crowd. Ethan paused. The hesitation immediately attracted attention. Investors exchanged glances. Reporters adjusted cameras. However, he continued, there are still discussions taking place that have not been finalized. The ballroom became perfectly silent. Maya felt the shift instantly. People who understood business language knew exactly what he was saying. Ethan was pulling back from the announcement. Publicly. Voluntarily. One investor near the front frowned. Another slowly lowered his champagne glass. The atmosphere changed in real time beneath the crystal chandeliers. Ethan continued speaking. I believe transparency matters more than timing. Therefore, no announcement will be made tonight. The reaction was immediate. Not outrage. Shock. Quiet shock. Questions began spreading across the room like ripples across water. Reporters looked at each other. Advisors near the stage appeared stunned. The decision would trigger conversations throughout Wall Street before sunrise. Yet Ethan continued calmly, refusing to elaborate further. Maya stood motionless beside the banquet tables while rain washed silver across the giant windows. She understood what nobody else did. Ethan had chosen honesty over control, not because investors demanded it, Not because reporters discovered anything. Because a waitress he dismissed had forced him to confront the difference between success and integrity. When the speech ended, applause arrived slowly and unevenly across the ballroom. Some guests clapped politely. Others remained thoughtful. Ethan stepped away from the podium and looked across the crowd once more. This time, when his eyes found Maya, there was no arrogance left in them. Only gratitude mixed with something far more uncomfortable. Respect. The ballroom never fully recovered after the announcement. Conversations returned. Glasses clinked softly against marble tabletops, and servers continued moving through the crowd beneath the crystal chandeliers. But something fundamental had changed. The evening no longer belonged to certainty. It belonged to questions. Investors gathered into smaller circles, speaking in lowered voices. Reporters typed rapidly into phones while editors somewhere across the city prepared headlines before midnight. Rain continued flowing down the giant glass walls surrounding the ballroom, turning the Manhattan skyline into a blurred sea of silver and gold reflections. Maya Johnson carried a tray of coffee cups toward the rear of the room. The adrenaline from earlier had faded, leaving only exhaustion behind. Her feet ached. Her shoulders felt heavy. She wanted nothing more than to finish her shift and catch the late train home. Yet every few minutes, she noticed guests glancing toward her. Some recognized her from the moment near the stage. Others simply sensed that she had become part of a story they did not fully understand. Maya disliked attention. Attention never paid hospital bills. Attention never solved problems. Attention usually created them. Near the ballroom entrance, Marcus Reed stood watching the room with quiet satisfaction. When Maya passed by, he offered her a small nod. Nothing more. He understood that some victories were too personal for celebration. Across the room, Ethan Crawford remained surrounded by advisors and investors. Questions came from every direction now. Why had the announcement changed? What happened with the negotiations? Was the partnership delayed? Ethan answered carefully, choosing honesty where he once might have chosen control. The difference was subtle but unmistakable. Several investors seemed surprised by it. Others appeared relieved. Maya refilled a water station near the windows and looked out at the city below. Rain tapped softly against the glass. Traffic lights reflected across wet streets, dozens of stories beneath her feet. For a moment, the noise of the ballroom faded away. She thought about her father sleeping at home. She thought about medical bills waiting on the kitchen table. She thought about the scholarship opportunities she once imagined would change everything. Life rarely followed the plans people made at 20 years old. Yet standing beside the rain-covered window, she felt something she had not felt in a long time. Peace. Not because she had influenced a billionaire. Not because powerful people finally noticed her. Because she had remained true to herself. A few minutes later, she heard footsteps approaching. She did not need to turn around to know who it was. Ethan stopped beside her near the glass wall overlooking Manhattan. For several seconds, neither spoke. The city lights reflected across the window between them. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. You were right. Maya kept her eyes on the skyline. About what? Ethan released a slow breath. About telling the truth before someone else did. Rain traced silver lines down the glass. The ballroom noise felt distant now. Ethan folded his hands in front of him. I spent most of my career believing success meant staying ahead of everyone else. Maya listened quietly. Tonight I realized that staying ahead and doing the right thing are not always the same thing. The honesty surprised her, not because the words were profound, but because they sounded genuine. Ethan turned slightly toward her. I owe you an apology. Maya looked at him for the first time since they reached the window. The billionaire who rolled his eyes at her. Earlier seemed different now. Not weaker, simply more human. You do not owe me anything, she said softly. Ethan shook his head. That is where you are wrong. The sentence lingered between them while rain continued washing silver across the Manhattan skyline. Neither spoke again for several moments. Sometimes the most important conversations happened inside the silence that followed. And standing beside the glass wall high above New York City, both of them seemed to understand that the evening was no longer about business deals at all. For a long moment, neither Maya Johnson nor Ethan Crawford spoke. Rain continued sliding down the enormous glass wall beside them, while the lights of Manhattan shimmered through the storm like distant stars scattered across black water. Behind them, the ballroom slowly returned to life. Investors resumed conversations. Servers collected empty glasses. Reporters prepared to leave with stories very different from the ones they expected when the evening began. Yet beside the window, the silence felt strangely separate from everything else. Ethan rested one hand against the polished railing near the glass. "Can I ask you something?" he finally said. Maya nodded slightly. "Why did you help me?" The question sounded honest. Not strategic. Not defensive. Honest. Maya looked toward the city below before answering. "I did not help you." Ethan frowned. "You warned me." She considered the distinction carefully. "I warned you because the truth was already there," she replied softly. "What you did with it was your choice." Rain tapped gently against the glass between them. Ethan lowered his eyes for a moment. The answer seemed to affect him more than Maya expected. "Most people would have used that information against me," he admitted. Maya smiled faintly. "Most people think power comes from having leverage over someone." Ethan looked toward her. "And you do not." Maya shook her head. "No," the city lights reflected across the window beside them. "Power is being able to do the wrong thing and choosing not to." The sentence settled into the quiet space between them. Ethan stared out at the skyline afterward as though trying to understand something that had been directly in front of him for years without ever truly seeing it. Across the ballroom, Marcus Reed noticed the conversation from a distance. He said nothing. Some lessons could not be taught. They had to be discovered. Several minutes passed before Ethan spoke again. "Marcus told me about Columbia." Maya laughed softly. "I should have guessed." Ethan turned toward her. "You were one of the best students in your program." Maya shrugged lightly. "That was a long time ago." "Not really." Ethan's voice remained calm. "Talent does not disappear because life gets difficult." The word surprised her more than she wanted to admit. For years, people had looked at her uniform and assumed it represented the entirety of her story. Very few bothered wondering what existed before it. Fewer still cared. Ethan continued. "You know, when I first saw you tonight, I thought I understood everything about you within 5 seconds." Maya raised an eyebrow. "And now?" Ethan released a quiet breath. "Now I realize I knew absolutely nothing." Rain rolled across the glass while thunder echoed softly somewhere beyond the skyline. The ballroom lights reflected warmly against the marble floor behind them. Maya folded her arms gently. "That happens more often than people admit." Ethan nodded. "Especially people like me." The honesty in his voice carried no self-pity, only recognition. For the first time all evening, Maya believed he understood what had actually happened. This was never about the Boston negotiations, never about investors, never about the announcement. It was about seeing another human being clearly. Across the ballroom, the final guests began collecting coats and preparing to leave. The event was ending. The long night was finally winding down. Ethan glanced toward the ballroom entrance before looking back at Maya. "You changed the direction of my entire evening with one sentence." Maya smiled faintly. "No," Ethan looked confused. She nodded toward the rain-covered city beyond the glass. "You changed it yourself when you decided to listen." For several seconds, he simply stood there absorbing the answer. Then something shifted behind his eyes. Hey, realization. Not about business. About people. About assumptions. About all the invisible individuals he had spent years overlooking without ever noticing what they might teach him. And standing beside the rain-streaked window high above Manhattan, Ethan Crawford finally understood that the most important negotiation of the night had never taken place in a boardroom. It had happened inside his own conscience. The ballroom had begun to empty by the time the conversation near the window came to an end. Crystal chandeliers still filled the room with warm golden light, but the energy had softened into something quieter now. Investors gathered coats. Reporters headed toward elevators carrying stories they would spend the next several days discussing. Staff members moved efficiently through the room, clearing glasses and folding linens, while rain continued washing silver reflections across the towering windows overlooking Manhattan. Maya Johnson returned to work without another word. There were still tables to clear and responsibilities waiting for her attention. That was how life worked. Meaningful moments rarely canceled ordinary obligations. She collected empty coffee cups from a table near the ballroom entrance and stacked them carefully onto a tray. Around her, conversations drifted through the room in fragments. Some guests discussed the delayed announcement. Others debated market reactions. A few spoke about Ethan Crawford with unexpected respect after his decision to step back from a deal that was not yet ready. None of them knew the entire story. Maya preferred it that way. Not every truth needed an audience. Across the room, Ethan remained speaking with a small group of investors. Yet his posture had changed. Earlier that evening, he carried himself like a man responsible for controlling every outcome. Now he looked more relaxed somehow, less guarded, more willing to listen than speak. Marcus Reed noticed it too. The hotel owner stood near the ballroom doors watching staff finish their duties. When Maya passed by carrying a tray of glasses, he smiled. Long night. Maya laughed softly. That is an understatement. Marcus glanced toward Ethan. You know most people spend years trying to teach lessons that never get learned. Maya followed his gaze across the ballroom. Ethan was listening to an investor instead of dominating the conversation. A small detail, but a meaningful one. People only change when they are ready, Maya replied. Marcus nodded. That may be true. He paused before adding. But someone still has to open the door. The sentence stayed with her as she continued working. Nearly 30 minutes later, the ballroom was almost empty. The rain outside had softened into a steady mist. City lights reflected across wet streets below. Maya was gathering the last of the serving trays when she heard footsteps approaching again. She turned and found Ethan standing beside one of the now empty tables beneath the chandeliers. He was holding a small white envelope. Before you leave, he said. Maya looked at the envelope but did not take it. What is it? Ethan placed it gently on the table between them. Not money. The answer arrived before she could ask the question. I figured you would refuse if that was all it contained. Maya remained silent. Ethan smiled faintly. It is a contact list. She frowned slightly. A contact list. People I trust. Ethan glanced toward the envelope. Professors. Financial analysts. Hiring managers. Friends. Maya looked at him carefully now. Why? Ethan seemed genuinely surprised by the question. Because someone should have helped you a long time ago. The ballroom grew quiet around them. Staff members worked in the distance, while soft music drifted from hidden speakers. Maya stared at the envelope without touching it. For years, she had learned to be skeptical whenever powerful people offered opportunities. Too often those offers came attached to expectations. But Ethan's expression carried none of that. Only sincerity. You do not owe me this, she said softly. Ethan nodded. I know. Rain whispered against the windows overlooking Manhattan. The billionaire looked around the nearly empty ballroom before speaking again. That is exactly why I want to do it. Maya finally picked up the envelope. Not because she expected anything from it. Not because she believed life suddenly became easier. But because for the first time all evening, the gesture felt less like charity and more like respect. Ethan smiled quietly. Whatever you decide, it is yours. Then he stepped back. No speeches. No conditions. No attempt to take credit. Just a simple act offered without expectation. And standing beneath the fading chandelier light, Maya realized the evening had done something neither of them anticipated. It had not changed their circumstances overnight. It had changed the way they saw each other. Sometimes that was where every meaningful transformation began. The last guests left shortly after midnight. One by one, the ballroom doors closed behind them until only hotel staff remained beneath the crystal chandeliers. The room that had once been filled with investors, reporters, and billion-dollar conversations now felt almost peaceful. Soft music drifted quietly through hidden speakers while workers folded linens and cleared the final tables. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. The towering glass walls now reflected a Manhattan skyline washed clean beneath the glow of countless city lights. Maya Johnson stood near the employee entrance fastening the buttons of her coat. Her shift was finally over. The silver tray she had carried throughout the evening rested on a nearby service cart. Her shoulders still ached. Her feet still hurt. Tomorrow would bring the same responsibilities waiting at home. Hospital bills, early alarms, long hours. Yet something felt different as she prepared to leave. Not because her life had magically changed. Because for the first time in a long while, she felt seen. Not as a waitress. Not as a background figure moving silently through other people's stories. As herself. She slipped the white envelope Ethan had given her into her coat pocket without opening it. Whatever opportunities it contained could wait until morning. Some things deserved quiet reflection rather than emotional decisions made after midnight. As Maya walked through the nearly empty lobby, Marcus Reed looked up from the reception desk, where he was reviewing paperwork. Heading home, he asked. Maya smiled. Finally, Marcus glanced toward the revolving doors overlooking the wet city streets. You handled yourself well tonight. Maya laughed softly. I mostly carried water and coffee. Marcus returned the smile. Sometimes that is not all people are carrying. The sentence lingered pleasantly between them. Maya thanked him and continued toward the exit. Outside, the air felt cool and fresh after the storm. Reflections from traffic lights shimmered across the wet pavement. The city sounded quieter than usual. Not silent. New York was never silent. But softer somehow. She stepped beneath the hotel awning and looked up at the skyline. Thousands of lights glowed against the darkness above. Each one represented someone carrying dreams, disappointments, responsibilities, or hopes nobody else could fully see. The thought made her smile. Behind her, several stories above street level, Ethan Crawford stood alone beside the same glass wall where their conversation had taken place earlier. The ballroom was almost empty now. Most of the staff had gone home. The giant screen had been turned off. The chandeliers glowed dimly overhead. Yet Ethan remained there looking down at the city below, not thinking about markets, not thinking about investors, not thinking about headlines. He was thinking about a waitress, a woman he dismissed within seconds of meeting her, a woman whose intelligence, dignity, and restraint had taught him more in a single evening than many executives had taught him in years. Earlier that morning, he believed success meant always being the smartest person in the room. Tonight, he understood something different. The smartest person in the room might be the one nobody bothered to notice. Down on the street, Maya began walking toward the subway station beneath the glow of streetlights reflecting across rain-soaked pavement. She never looked back at the hotel. She did not know Ethan was still standing at the window watching the city. She did not know investors would spend weeks discussing his decision. She did not know whether the contacts inside the envelope would lead anywhere meaningful. None of that mattered in the moment. What mattered was simpler. She had chosen integrity when she could have chosen advantage. She had answered disrespect with dignity. She had remained herself. High above the street, Ethan finally stepped away from the glass. The reflection staring back at him looked different now. Not because his wealth had changed, because his perspective had. And as the lights inside the ballroom slowly dimmed one section at a time, Manhattan continued shining beyond the windows, while a waitress walked home through the night, and a billionaire quietly carried a lesson that would stay with him far longer than any business deal ever could.
I look around this empty room and I wonder what it was all for. I suppose winning isn't everything.